You've unlocked a Roundtable.
Hello, and welcome to the Lost Levels Roundtable discussion of X-Men Apocalypse. My name is Chris Levon. With me, as always, is Alex Sandberg.
Hello.
And we just watched X-Men Apocalypse. So, before we get into it, our Roundtable discussions are spoiler-free at the beginning, and so we do a full review. Then we go to our credits, and after that, we go into the spoiler discussion, where we can actually talk about the movie more freely and get into our actual thoughts regarding certain plot lines or characters that we don't want to discuss and spoil for you. So we'll go into the review first and then the spoilers after if you're interested in that. So that being said, this is the third movie of the second trilogy of the X-Men franchise.
Which is hard to get your head wrapped around, but yeah, okay. That's a lot of movies, a lot of numbers.
Right. So this is the sequel to First Class, Days of Future Past, and now Apocalypse.
Mm-hmm.
And that being said, Apocalypse, those two movies set up Apocalypse, which is like one of the all-time most challenging villains for the X-Men. Huge setup.
For the whole Marvel universe, really. Well, heavy hitter.
Very big heavy hitter. And I was really interested. Like, I was stoked. Like, First Class really went in a different direction than the other trilogy went, and I liked it. I really liked the dynamic between Xavier and Magneto. That really sold X-Men First Class for me.
Yeah, because they're such central characters to that universe, and their relationship is so dynamic and interesting that it served for a really interesting story.
And yeah, even in the first trilogy, like, you know, Patrick Stewart and
Ian McKellen.
Ian McKellen's relationship was great and something that I always wanted to see more of.
Yeah, but you see their buddy moments on Twitter and stuff like that, which is always enjoyable to see.
Absolutely. So I was really, really into First Class. The fact that they explored that relationship and they just did a really good job with it.
Mm-hmm.
With McCoy and Fassbender. Like, Fassbender's Magneto, I absolutely just love.
He does a great job in general. Yeah,
he is just great. So that goes into, obviously, Days of Future Past, which was a mesh or a blending of the two casts where you have the newer class and then you also have the older class returning.
Yeah, you got your James McAvoy's and Fassbender's meeting Magneto and Patrick Stewart.
Which could have been a cluster, but actually turned out to be a pretty entertaining movie. I enjoyed Days of Future Past.
Really fun movie, totally.
And then setting up Apocalypse at the very end of that, leading into this. So there was huge excitement for me coming off those two movies. And so we watched it, and
it does not live up to the other two.
it doesn't. It's weird because I walked out of the theater thinking to myself, I enjoyed this movie more than the reviews gave it. Reviews right now are pretty much split down the middle. It's like around 48% on Rotten Tomatoes. And I lean towards the above 50% tile. I liked it, but I do have problems with it. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
I found myself pretty entertained with it. I really liked what they were trying to do with some of the relationships and building like more of the character in terms of like Magneto and like just how he is and how after the events of Days of Future Past. And I liked that they explored those, although the movie did suffer from it.
Right, they suffered because I don't think they did it in a manner that made me care.
Really? I cared.
I didn't. I don't know.
I was into those moments. I was there for those. Like I was in it. I was definitely into the movie. But the problem with it was they added several new characters to the cast, and we didn't get that same type of build up or relationship with those new members that we did with the previous members in the other films.
Yes, I completely agree with that.
So these characters kind of felt almost shoehorned in because they really wanted to continue the development of the characters that they've already established in that in the second trilogy. So you had, character development through obviously Professor Xavier and Magneto and even Mystique. All of
Right.
them, progressed as characters in that, but they didn't really focus in on the new characters very much at all. And I wanted to see them shine. I really wanted to see more of them.
Yeah, they definitely underutilize a lot of the characters in this. Like, I mean, some of them they just kind of put in there, I feel, just to say they're in there, like Jubilee. Like,
Oh, she's a throwaway character, yeah.
oh, totally. And even, I mean, to some degree, Psylocke and Storm. Like,
Absolutely.
they just weren't used a lot at all. They barely had any lines. They had no character growth or development or anything. They're just kind of there on the sidelines. And I felt like that was a lot of this movie. They bring in a lot of things that I just feel were always kind of on the sidelines.
It's kind of like Psylocke was the equivalent of Boba Fett, where
Yeah.
didn't have a lot of screen time, didn't have like much to say, and through it all, kind of just is a villain,
Mm-hmm.
and it just doesn't do very much. So I agree with you. I think there was a lot of disappointment in regards to setting up some of these characters, seeing these characters on the screen. Like, I'm really excited to see Storm again. I'm really excited to see Psylocke being introduced. Obviously, she was introduced in um, Brett Ratner's X-Men: The Last Stand, but never really utilized. She was just kind of there in the background.
Yeah, I don't even remember her in that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was a movie that suffered from too many characters. And the thing that I always liked, or one thing that was always one of the positives when Bryan Singer started taking on the X-Men franchise, was the fact that he had to deal with so many characters, and he was able to give them enough to do on the screen that we didn't ever feel necessarily that they didn't get enough screen time, or they didn't get enough to say or do or anything like that. And that's what we talked about with the original X-Men and X2. He had to manage all that. He did a good job. However, now it feels like this was one of those failures where there was just too many characters involved into it, and there wasn't enough development or enough screen time for them to really shine, to really do much. Because I like the idea that they brought, a younger Cyclops back, a younger Jean Grey, Storm, Nightcrawler, and like we got to see these characters again, some characters that we haven't seen for a while, and we really enjoy, obviously, if you're an X-Men fan.
Right. But I just felt like everything was so split between those new characters and the older characters, and the other side stuff going on, that there was just no strong focus to this movie, so everything just felt muddled and jumbled together, and it was hard for me to really care about one thing that was going on, because it jumped around so much and so loosely that it was hard for me to focus on anything.
Yeah, it does bounce around a lot, and you don't have enough time to focus on key things. And some things that they do focus in on, I feel they focus in on too much. They give too much time to some things that kind of made the pacing kind of up and down. And I have problems with it.
Yeah, I think, talking about this now and how you set everything up, I feel like my biggest problem was I felt personal weight to everything that was going on. I mean, with the first one, with First Class, it was the relationship between Magneto and Xavier was really strong, and it was really easy for me to connect with that. And with the second one, it was very heavy on the political aspect of everything, and the nature of the mutants, and how they're perceived by the world. And in this, they touch on that, and they still go into that, but it just not in a very strong manner. It's just kind of on the sidelines, while we focus a lot on Apocalypse and his agenda, and it just focuses on something that's hard for a regular person to identify with.
Yeah, and that you bring that up is one of the main faults with this movie. I felt that Apocalypse was a huge letdown in terms of just him being on screen, him being such a menacing character, such a integral part of the history and the lore of the X-Men franchise, to be not represented to the extent that he should have been on screen, I think was a major letdown for me personally. And one of the major flaws that I saw in this movie, that they didn't really capture that apocalypse feel to it. Like I never felt like, holy shit! I mean, they're dealing with apocalypse. I can't believe they're dealing with apocalypse. This is amazing. It was just more this blue guy kind of walking around and having his own like a little agenda, but not really like. I don't know. It's hard to explain.
He uses his quote unquote four horsemen, his four followers, a lot, and they're the brunt of everything he does. And when it comes time for him to do stuff, he doesn't do much.
Yeah, and see, whenever we're doing reviews and we're doing like we're talking about trilogies, and as of late, many trilogies always break up the third chapter into two movies to space it out for reasons to maximize the potential of that franchise.
Right.
So they'll stretch out the third story into two movies. And I always complain about that because it's hard to draw out an interest. However, I'm saying the opposite with this trilogy. I'm thinking that they should have made Apocalypse two movies. Two movies where we can establish more stuff. We can establish Apocalypse. We can establish the Four Horsemen and just what they mean in the Apocalypse universe and what they can do, and have a better setup of just how menacing Apocalypse can be onto the world.
Yeah.
As well as developing your younger generation X-Men and giving them more to do and giving them more character arc. Stretching that throughout two movies gives you a lot more depth to these characters. So when you get to the second movie,
and a lot more weight to what was happening.
Right. You can set this movie up as the establishment of Apocalypse, obviously, establishing his four horsemen, having them do some stuff that is really, bad for humanity, and then carrying that over to a second movie where now you kind of establish all of these new characters, having them grow a little bit, and then having them do the fight in a second movie. I think that would have made this movie a lot better. I mean, this movie's 2.5 hours as is, and it doesn't do very much, as we kind of talked about, in terms of the setup and character development. So it's something that could have definitely benefited from kind of giving more time to these characters and putting it into two separate movies.
Yeah.
Especially because you're dealing with such a important villain into it. It's kind of like what the flaw that we saw in Batman v Superman with their major villain,
right?
And having that kind of villain just be there for 10 minutes of screen time, and,
essentially, yeah.
And that's it. It's like you didn't do that right. You need to set that up, and you need to do more with it. And this kind of felt like the same way. I don't think they've established Apocalypse nearly what they could have done, and made him a lot more menacing than that he actually is in the comic books. So I was disappointed in that regard. I was disappointed overall with Apocalypse as a character.
Because I don't know. I always felt like when battling Apocalypse, you get to the point where all the chips are down, everything's devastated, they get their asses whooped, and it's just it feels hopeless. And I never felt that here. I just felt like, okay, here's a big strong guy. Let's team up and beat him. Come on, team, let's do this.
Yeah, there's something about it that just it didn't captivate what it needed to captivate and get me onto the edge of the seat. Holy shit! It felt very just by the numbers. All right, we're gonna team up now and do this, as you kind of just mentioned.
Yeah.
And I needed him to be more menacing. I needed more of him. And
I needed more of him. I needed more team building so that I actually cared about the battle these guys were going into. It's like, oh, cool, they went to a mall, which you don't even see. You just know they went to a mall, which would have been which could have been a great scene where you saw them interacting together on a more personal level as people, as kids, trying to deal with this shit, trying to be kids while still struggling with their mutant sides. So you get a deep connection to them as people and as a unit, but they squandered that. And that could have been a really good scene that they just fell apart.
Yeah, I mean, how do they deal with Nightcrawler being blue and hanging out at a mall?
Oh my god.
Like,
Right?
how do they deal with that stuff? They put a Michael Jackson jacket on. Like, oh, okay, well, he blends in now, so that's fine. It's because it's an 80s movie, so they have to have a Michael Jackson jacket. But, like, I wanted to see them develop and start seeing little indications of Cyclops starting to be the leader. Of like, knowing that he's the leader of the X-Men. I wanted to see leadership capability from him. Not necessarily like full-blown, like, I'm a douche, I'm the leader.
Right.
But I want to see little tiny bits and pieces of him, like, saying, all right, we need to, this is our strategy into this battle. This is what we need to do. Instead, we have, like, a young Cyclops that is very inexperienced. They mentioned that in the movie, obviously, but they don't want to really show the leadership ability for him.
They paint him more as a kind of a douchebag than anything, you know? Like, a trouble in school, just kind of cocky and abrasive towards people.
Yeah, they never gave him, like, why would people follow this guy?
Right.
And if he's a true leader, obviously, he would always have at least some of that charisma, some of those abilities throughout, like, his childhood into his teenage years and all that. But instead, as you kind of mentioned, they kind of just paint him as
a loose cannon that's always an outcast.
A troublemaker type of guy.
Right. And I never got... The Scott Summers is kind of supposed to be the Boy Scout.
Yeah.
And especially when compared to, like, Wolverine.
Right. And that dynamic is why it works so well. He's the Boy Scout, and then you have Wolverine who's a polar opposite of that. But you don't see stuff like that. And that's the little things in this movie that I think that they missed on.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, like, in terms of Apocalypse, that's my biggest disappointment.
And while yes, they are little things, there's a bunch of these little things that they could have added to make this a really good movie.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree. And that's what it suffers from. Why don't we talk about the look of Apocalypse? I mean, that was obviously one of the biggest complaints once he was his first image on the internet.
Oh, okay, yes.
Just the way he looks overall as a whole, like, versus the traditional comic book Apocalypse. You didn't care.
I didn't care, one way or the other. I thought it looked fine. I didn't think it was overly awesome. I wasn't overly offended by it either. Like, I'm like, I guess for this universe, this First Class universe, it makes more sense. Because it's not overly cartoony as you expect from the main cinematic Marvel universe, where they can get away with stuff like that. I feel like there's more grounds of reality in this, so it made more sense to have him look that way for me.
I don't know. I'm on the opposite side. It didn't offend me by any means. I was like, all right, they went with this costume choice or this design. I wanted him to look a little bit more traditional to the book. I wanted him to be bulkier. I wanted to see, like, they didn't really go into how some movies suffer from, we need to show the actor's face. Otherwise, we can't tell who this is.
Right, like, and this Judge Dredd.
Yeah, or Venom when in Spider-Man 3.
Okay, yeah.
Like, studios do that on purpose. It's like, well, we got this actor, so we have to show him. Mm-hmm. And with Oscar Isaac being such a very popular actor,
especially these days, yes,
and blowing up everywhere, it could have been a choice of, like, we need to see him. We need to see that. However, they didn't really do that because you can't tell it's him,
right? With
all the makeup on and the prosthetics that they put on his face. So I would have rather gone with, like, a full blown look of Apocalypse. Maybe they take off the A, off the top of his head or something
Yeah.
like that. But overall, I still wanted the Apocalypse feel. I wanted that look.
Okay.
I wanted
Yeah.
that menacing appearance.
The
like,
hulking figure. Yeah, I could see that.
because that just invokes more fear. Because
Mm-hmm.
it's like this immortal type of god.
Right. Okay. Now that you put it that way, yeah, I can agree with you because I heard people complain. I'm like, I was more focusing on his face more than anything rather than his whole physique. I'm like, yeah, his face is fine. It's weathered. It's human. Whatever. It doesn't because the Apocalypse from the cartoons and comics, has the very standout face, which is what I always kind of focused on. So I was like, yeah, the face is fine, but now that you mentioned the whole physique, yes, I think it could benefit from being bulkier.
Yeah, I mean, he just kind of looks like this frail, blued guy.
Mm-hmm.
And he just goes and manipulates these 4 heavily powered mutants and makes them into his 4 horsemen. But even in the 90s cartoon, like, he was just more invoking fear and, like, just was a better presented character than he was here in this movie. And that was my biggest disappointment with it. Because, like, I felt like once Apocalypse didn't work for me, then this film didn't work.
Okay.
I needed him to work. I think that, I would have enjoyed this a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't work for me for many other reasons, I feel. Many of those small other reasons that we mentioned. And this is just, just another small thing that just adds to it.
Well, what else? What didn't you like?
A lot of the acting and a lot of the dialogue.
Really?
I thought it was very melodramatic and cheesy. Like, you have people like Jennifer Lawrence and, Michael Fassbender, these very renowned actors delivering the lines, and I cringed at some of them. I thought they were bad.
Do you have an example?
Not that I could think of offhand, but it's just, I just like I said, I just felt a lot of the writing was very melodramatic and just heavy-handed and cliche on many levels.
Yeah, I agree. Like, the reasons why I liked the other movies, like Days of Future Past and First Class, was the writing was strong enough to really develop these characters and give them some meat on the bone to really act and really show a lot of range and dynamic bits here. And this third movie, Apocalypse, you're right. That there are a lot of just poorly written lines where they have to do their best with, but ultimately these are just crap lines. Like, you can be the best actor in the entire world. If there's poor writing, you're kind of looking at it like, I gotta say this shit.
Well, yeah, I mean, that goes back to that famous argument between Harrison Ford and George Lucas. He's like, yeah, you can write the shit down, but you don't have to say it. And it's, yeah, that's the major part of it.
Yeah, there are some lines that do come off wrong, are very, very melodramatic. A lot of Jennifer Lawrence's lines when she's trying to invoke strength through her speeches ultimately fall off flat. The funny thing that you mentioned that is because it kind of reminded me of Snow White and the Huntsman, where Kristen Stewart was trying to deliver similar types of, like, motivational speeches.
Oh, okay.
And just the way that they were delivered and presented on screen, was like, oh my god, that was like the worst motivational speech I've ever seen. And that would not inspire anybody.
Right.
The way that
okay.
and that's what it reminded me of, like, when I was watching some of those lines. Because you're right, there is a lot of, not a lot, there are some moments in there that were, it's like, ooh, no, I don't think that works as what they wanted it to work as. And that's kind of the shorthandedness or the short-sightedness of some of the writing here. And I don't know, like, there's other issues with it too. So what are some other things that you're thinking of in terms of problems?
I think it'd be best if I wait for the spoiler section to go into that.
Okay. We can definitely get into that. Okay, so in the non-spoiler review, what else do you want to touch on here? What do you think of the special effects?
Oh. Generally they were all right, but there was definitely some shots where they could have used an extra pass or two on compositing. Like there were some painfully green screen looking shots.
Yeah, I did notice a couple myself.
I mean, even early on, there was a shot when it was those blocks sliding down those tunnels, destroying the pillars. Like, it's some relatively simple like that, where you don't even have any actors in the scene, didn't look all that stellar.
Yeah, and I agree. There are definitely some shoddy moments. There's some great, brilliant moments in special effects. Like, oh man, that was great.
Yeah, yeah.
And then there's others, and it's like, oh, no.
You know, especially what's probably my favorite scene in the movie, which is remnant of my favorite scene in the last movie, which we'll get into later. But
Okay, well, definitely put a pin in that, and we'll talk about that in the spoiler section. So, yeah, there's just I don't want to blame the actors, and I don't want to say that they were phoning in some of their performances, and I overall don't feel that was the case. I just think it was like they just had too little to do.
it didn't have a lot to work with.
Yeah, there's just not there, and I think one of the other problems, which is weird for me to say, but I'm going to say it, is Quicksilver's second montage. Second being the first one where he established himself in Days of Future Past as being this ultimate Quicksilver where everybody loved him.
Yeah.
So I felt like the producers were like, all right, well, we need another scene like this.
Well, actually, that's the scene that I was just referring to previously.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because it was reminiscent of the first time, which is my favorite scene in that movie.
Okay, yeah. All right. So that's I kind of want to talk about that like briefly without getting into details of it. I want to say that it felt like producers it stunk it of studio getting involved saying you need to do another montage. You need to do another Quicksilver part or bit in order to satisfy us. And that's what it was to me. It felt too I mean it didn't feel necessarily out of place, but they definitely wanted to take their time with it and make sure that like, all right, you guys love Quicksilver. Marvel has their own Quicksilver. We're going to make sure that we do or try to recapture that what you loved of Days of Future Past in him, and we're going to do it again here. Something that like sequels do a lot in movies where they kind of repeat stuff that they thought everybody loved because you loved this in the first movie, so we're putting a sequel. We're doing it again, and that's what it felt like to me.
Right, and definitely it was that, but they upped up the ante in such a way, and they put such a different spin on it that it was refreshing.
Okay, I didn't hate it by any means, but I definitely felt that it was a studio note saying do this again.
Yeah,
find a way to do this again.
Yeah, you're probably right about that.
But it overall it didn't bother me as much, but it did make me feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one was the cameo that people know because it was in a trailer. But we'll save for the spoiler section so we can get into that a little bit more.
Yeah, that's probably smart.
So, all right. I think we've talked enough about it in the non-spoiler section. What are your final thoughts?
This movie ultimately is a movie that tried to do too much and spent too little time on everything it tried to do, to the point where I just feel like nothing is really well connected and cohesive. It's not by any means a terrible movie, but it's definitely not one I feel like you need to run out and see in theaters. It's fine for what it is. It falls into that kind of the third movie of a trilogy trap, which I think they kind of poke fun of, but I think was also, sadly true, that it's the weakest of the trilogy. And could have been so good, but they had too many minor failings that added up.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. I thought that one line that they delivered in the movie that you just mentioned was a very big, cocky kind of shot.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, we're gonna poke fun at like other movies like The Last Stand, but then we ultimately delivered a similar type of scenario where
Yeah.
it is
It is
the weakest.
it was way too meta of a joke.
It is the weakest of the new trilogy of the X-Men franchise, and something as I talked about, and I will continue to say, is it should have been made into two films where they had more character development and more time to really develop even Apocalypse.
Yeah, more character, more development, more plot development, as far as I'm concerned. As
Yeah,
well.
because this ultimately just feels like a point A to point B to point C, just very linear path. Like you establish your villain, you establish your new characters, and you just go on this path. And there's no really deviation to it. There's no real like thought behind why characters are doing stuff. There's no motive to anything. It's just like, hey, you're part of this now. Let's do this. And then they're like, oh, all right.
Yeah.
And you don't really feel for the characters. You don't care. So ultimately, I agree with you. I think that this is definitely the weakest of the movies. I still enjoyed it more than a lot of people, though, and I will stress that. Okay. So I will say, go check this out in a theater. But it is very 50-50. Like, either you're going to like it or you're not really going to care for it. And if you're ultimately an X-Men fan, want to say that you're still going to enjoy it even though it has a lot of flaws.
Okay.
And, okay, so, Alex, how can I reach you?
You can follow me on Twitter. My name there is Alex Sandberg, AlexSanberg, or email me directly at the website, alex@lostlevel.com. And Chris, what about you?
Let's see, twitter.com/calmintensity. I am on Instagram as well. Chris is calm there. And that's really the two places. But if you want to follow Lost Level on social media, go to lostlevel.com. That's our website. In the upper right-hand corner, we have all of our links to our social media. We also have a YouTube page that we're developing and putting all of these podcasts on as well. So if you are at work and wanted to listen to something in your headphones and just veg out a little bit, we'd really appreciate it. Subscribe to our channel there. We're trying to grow that a little bit. So thank you again for listening, and hang on for spoilers. Spoilers!
Spoilers!
All right. Where do we begin?
Should we get Weapon X out of the way?
All right. Weapon X. You have to have, if you have a Bryan Singer movie, you have to have Hugh Jackman involved.
I guess.
You have to find a way to get Wolverine somewhere in the movie, and we have that when they return to Stryker's laboratory base that we've seen in previous films. And obviously this is in a different timeline, so we see it in an early variation of it. And this is when they are controlling Wolverine without any of his memories or anything. And he is Weapon X.
Yes.
Which is cool. I actually liked it. I was cool with the fact that he had like that helmet thing on and like wire sticking out of him and like that belt, and like he was being controlled by them. I liked that iconic look, and I bought into it. I was actually a fan of it, but I was also thinking like, oh Jesus, Adam is going to just love the shit out of this moment.
Yeah, I mean, I was okay with it being in there, but also I felt it just found this case of they could have done a lot more with that scene, and it was done kind of dully. It was just him kind of running through the hallway, just chopping guys, and it's brutal, it's visceral, but it didn't feel badass. It felt just very rushed and very like, oh, here's your Wolverine shanking people. All right, he's done.
That's a thing.
Run away, Wolverine. You're good. Thank you for that cameo to make fanboys love this movie even more.
Well, okay, so my thoughts on it are kind of similar a little bit. I like that there was just no regard to him taking machine gun fire.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in X2, was it, he gets shot in the head once and then he falls down and has to wait for himself to heal. Maybe they're trying to just say, oh, it's a younger version, so he can just heal instantaneously and he doesn't have to regenerate or anything like that, because he was just non-shot. They weren't even recognizing the fact that he was just getting shot all over the place. He was just running person to person, slaying them and moving on in a rage. And that was one of the things I didn't like. There was just like no realism to it. There was no, for a movie that wants to like try to set itself a little bit into a more of a realistic tone, you just put him into this huge rage and it didn't matter.
Exactly.
It bothered me. Secondly, this could have been an interesting scene where you started to see Cyclops or Scott become more of a leader. Instead of using Wolverine as a plot device to just eliminate all of the soldiers in this base, eliminate Wolverine, take him out of it, and now you have the kids learning how to eliminate or neutralize these soldiers and work as a team.
Right.
You can build that up and have them, like Nightcrawler, Jean, and Scott, start working together to eliminate these soldiers and use their powers creatively to do so. And Scott lead that. That would have been a huge character development for them.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Instead, we need to clear out this base. How can we do that? Well, we can use Wolverine. Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, let's do that.
So let's do that. Oh, Weapon X. Perfect. We'll do that. So yeah, that's what I felt like. It was just an easy way for the script to clear out this base. To clear out the base quickly.
Yeah.
What else?
Shit. What else do we want to touch on?
I really didn't like the fact that Psylocke did really nothing.
I didn't like the fact that they overpowered Magneto so much.
Yeah, he's an ultimate.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think my biggest thing was, you know, how I felt there was weight to everything that was happening in the first two films. In this one, you just have Magneto just ripping up buildings everywhere, destroying everything, and I did not give a shit, like, at all. I felt no weight to this devastation that it is causing. Like, he's destroying buildings, you know, thousands of people are probably dying here.
Millions.
Yes. And it's just like, whatever. Let's not care about it, because it's cool to see all this shit debris fly into the air.
Yeah, there's no regard to anything in this movie. It's just like, hey, Apocalypse unlocked Magneto's powers. We're going to use that, and we're going to just cause global destruction.
Yes. This is the destruction here is worse than destruction in Man of Steel, like tenfold.
Hard to argue, but
okay, yes, fine. Magneto's a villain, whatever. Who gives it?
Not even that. It's the fact that even Man of Steel gave human
element to it, where you see people in buildings that are, you know, collapsing around them. This one's just, oh, there goes a building, whatever.
Yeah, it just feels like a cartoon. It's like, oh, they're just destroying everything. So all these buildings are magically disintegrating and going up into the air and working their way towards Egypt or whatever the hell.
And fucking that, I mean, they were taken by Stryker because of a strong mutant presence that they felt, and now all this destruction happens, and because of mutants, you think there would be repercussions for that, and you get none of that. You get no feeling of any backlash after all this devastation, which there should have been insurmountable amounts coming towards mutants. And it's just, okay, fine, whatever. Let Xavier have his school. He'll have his school with all mutants, and you know what? He wants to get humans in there too? Cool, fine, whatever. They're not a threat. No, the world would see them as a threat, especially after that.
Yeah, the fact that the world has been looking for Magneto for so long, he surfaces, destroys millions of people, destroys buildings globally, And they're like, well, you know what? At the end, he worked to save humanity in Apocalypse, so yeah, he's free. It's cool.
Whatever.
He can go help rebuild Xavier's mansion. Oh my god. You're right. It feels very cartoony in the way that people think and justify all these things that happen, because it is kind of just thrown away. Once the threat is over, everything magically is fine.
Yeah.
There's no Mutant Registration Act. There's no just, whatever. We've already covered that in a different movie, so we're not going to cover it again. Move on.
No, but it's still an ongoing issue, and it's something they completely ignore, which, could have been really good strength for the series, for particularly this.
Yeah, and they could have set up a lot more in that regard. Instead, they wanted to choose to go to they're ultimately going into, they want to go, they've been doing decades.
Yeah.
So now this is the 80s, so now they want to go
They've been aging really well.
They want to go into the classic 90s version if they do continue making these films with these casts and everything, which I don't know. I don't know if they will or not, but they've already talked about wanting to do the 90s. Obviously, the 90s is like one of those golden ages for the X-Men because you had the 90s cartoon.
Right.
You had that traditional look. That's when X-Men was like at the height of everybody's, at least for me, appeal. They were
I think that's what really brought comic books into the mainstream. That's what started to bring it there.
Yeah, I mean, those 90s cartoons, and, that includes Batman, the Ultimate, or animated series, Superman, like, all those cartoons were great in the 90s for the superheroes, and X-Men was at the forefront, or one of the forefront for that. So, they want to do that, and then that end credit scene, the Essex, that is a lead to, was it Mr. Sinister?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the lead to Mr. Sinister, which is one of those also iconic villains that the X-Men battled in those cartoons, and somebody who is a formidable force, but not as much as Apocalypse.
No, not nearly as much.
So, like, I would, if they were going to go that route, I would rather seen them do Sinister first and then lead up to Apocalypse.
Yes, that would have been the smarter way to go.
Instead of going back and forth, ultimately defeating, I don't know, like, to talk about the way that they defeated Apocalypse, it's kind of anticlimactic. Like, I don't know,
right.
like,
well, anytime when there is a battle going on in somebody's mind where there are no rules or understanding what's going on,
right.
I immediately lose interest because I'm like, well, this, as someone who doesn't have telepathic powers, I can't relate to this whatsoever. I don't understand why suddenly Apocalypse came so much stronger just because he has that much control over Xavier. Okay, fine, I guess. I mean, it's when you lose your grounding that much, it's hard to really take those battles seriously for me.
Yeah, and for them to continue to try nonstop to damage him, and obviously they're trying all their different powers and stuff. Like, all right, that makes sense. Why would Beast jump at him? Like, what would Beast's chance be? Like, he's getting shot with lasers. He's getting
he is destroying all this metal that is being tossed at him. Beast, what did you think? Beast is lucky he he was just disintegrated.
He should have been.
Right.
He should have been, even by friendly fire. Like, friendly fire should have messed his ass up.
Oh, yeah, totally.
But what was he going to do? Like, grab him?
Mm-hmm.
He was going to go through the big force field and grab...
That was dumb.
What was that? The thing that I did actually nerd out about was the second thing. I nerded out about Weapon X. And the second thing I nerded out about was when Xavier kind of just said, unleash your power, Jean. And I'm like, oh, shit.
Yeah.
And then she started walking towards Apocalypse, like, getting psyched up. And then she starts walking on air. I'm like, oh, shit. And then she uses the Phoenix, which is inside of her. And I was like, holy shit. I liked it. I want Bryan Singer to do a justified Phoenix Saga.
Yeah.
Because he didn't get his way to do it. He went to do the Superman Returns movie instead. and Brett Ratner took over the Phoenix Saga. And right here, this was a better Phoenix Saga thing for me than all of Last Stand was.
Yeah, but my problem with that is I feel it's too soon for being just introduced to this character. I mean, you got hints of it, I guess, when she was sleeping and having those nightmares and everything was around her was burning. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I see what's going on here.
Right.
But to have that not come full force, but to be acknowledged so much, I was just kind of like, you're really showing your hand here, guys.
Well, that's one of the problems with this movie. You put an ultimate villain into it. You put Apocalypse, an immortal villain.
If they would have done Sinister first and start to lead to the hints of Phoenix, then have that unleashed during the next movie, which should have been Apocalypse,
and her not
would have made a lot more sense.
And her not controlling it or anything like that. Like, if you wanted to build out your franchise, that's the way that you do it.
Mm-hmm.
But they put Apocalypse, this immortal figure, that they need to find a way, a MacGuffin type of like thing, where like, all right, well, we need to do something to defeat an immortal being. And all right, well, Jean is known to have the Phoenix strength. It locked inside of her. We need to use that in order to defeat him, because we can't do it with all these other people. Maybe Beast could do it. We'll throw Beast. No, okay, Beast didn't do it. He tried.
Valiant effort there, Beast. Good game,
Beast. Why don't you go help Scott out? And so then they unleashed the Phoenix, and that's ultimately, it makes sense that it's the thing that destroys them. So I'm okay with them using the Phoenix.
Yeah.
But it was, as you said, the setup.
Right.
Which was unfortunate, because there's so many great stories they could have done leading up into this. Her not being able to control those powers and being like just kind of like on edge. It would have been great. There's so much character development they could have done with Jean. Would have been awesome throughout a couple movies. But they didn't. They squandered it, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
But I still like the Phoenix. I will fully blow out. Like I enjoyed that fact, and I did nerd out, despite it not being drawn out the way they should have.
Yeah. And one thing they also didn't draw out, which I felt they should have, was Scott Summers' brothers just dying, just being blown up, and like, oh, okay, my brother just went kablooey. Like, let's
Well, that's the problem. You have too much shit trying to go on in this movie, and that's it. I mean, right there, you like that. You have important moments in characters that kind of have to be glossed over, because you already have a 2.5 hour movie. You break some of this stuff up, you expand it out, you can touch on these moments and have more impact on it. Because like maybe the death of Havoc makes Scott start being that leader inside of that facility instead of being Weapon X.
I mean, and they did what they could with it, which I forget which character it was, saying, oh no, he thought you were the person that's going to make something of yourself. Like, I could see how that would have charged him to take, more of a leadership role, but you don't see that.
No.
Which it kind of defeats the purpose of that dialogue and that happening at all.
That's what they're expecting the audience to know, that he eventually will turn into the leader of the X-Men, rather than showing it. And that was one of the downfalls. That was one of the shortcomings. That, like, aside from Apocalypse being the largest shortcoming for me personally, there was the shortcomings of the noobs and not really having them do very much. Oh. And so many extra scenes that they threw in that didn't need to actually be in there. I don't know what it is with Bryan Singer and having like fight clubs, but he did it in the first movie, obviously with his introduction to Wolverine, fighting people, and then he has it again in this movie, showing Nightcrawler facing off against Archangel and or Angel, and it doesn't. Like, we don't need this scene, really.
No.
I mean, okay, this is how you introduced your characters, but, like, it overall, not needed.
Why couldn't Nightcrawler escape?
Electricity? I don't know.
The plot. Because plot.
Because the script.
Yes, the script called for him not to escape.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of things that just
Right.
didn't necessarily need to be in there, but they threw those in and ignored other key points that should have had more weight behind them.
Totally.
All right, we've been talking about this movie forever.
We have been.
So
And I feel like we've gotten our points across.
right. Any other last minute scenes that we haven't talked about yet?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, I don't think I do either. So thanks for listening. We really appreciate it. Sorry if we talked too much, but we really enjoyed talking about this, I think.
Yeah.
I had a good time trying to dissect this.
It was nice to actually not agree with each other on every point this time.
Yeah, hopefully the next movie that we review will be similar to that regard, because we do agree too much. And it's annoying. All right, well, we'll talk to you guys soon.
Bye.